Widely known as the Athens of the South, it is only fitting that Nashville boasts the only full-size replica of the Greek Parthenon. Located in Centennial Park, the site of Tennessee's Centennial Exposition of 1897, visitors are welcome to view the ever-changing art exhibit, enjoy the gardens and the lakes, and stroll through the 132 acres that are Centennial Park. Standing over 41 feet tall, Nashville's Athena is the largest indoor sculpture in the Western world. Well, here we are at Nashville's Parthenon with Wesley Payne.
Yes.
And you are, what is your position here?
Well, sometimes I tell people I'm the head goddess, but the actual
you
position,
look like you are. Yeah.
the actual position is museum director.
Okay, all right. And you're going to take us on a tour of this wonderful place.
Yes.
Well, let's get started.
Okay. Nashville's Parthenon was built first as the art building for the Tennessee Centennial Exposition because Nashville had the nickname Athens of the South. Probably because of an emphasis on education from the time the city was founded. They really enjoyed that nickname, liked what it said about the city. So when the state decided to celebrate its 100th birthday of statehood and do a big World's Fair type exposition, Nashville said, okay, we'll participate. We will build the art building, and we'll build it as a copy of the Parthenon to remind everybody that we're the Athens of the South. So that's what they did. All the buildings that were built to be temporary, including this one. But when the exposition, the 6-month exposition was over and all the buildings were scheduled to be torn down, Nashvillians had fallen in love with this building. And they said, no, you can't tear it down. This is the symbol of the city. So they left it standing. And when the city purchased the land that had been the grounds of the exposition to be a public park, then they had this building that had been built to be temporary. They had to figure out what to do with it. They left it standing as it was for 23 years, and the decorative elements, the sculpture, the ornamentation, which had been built of plaster, were falling apart, were dangerous, and so they were taken off, and by 1920, the city had decided, okay, we're going to make it permanent. They reused the foundations and the core brick walls, but made new surfaces and new sculpture on the outside, and decided to make the inside a recreation for the first time. There were restaurants at the fair, and one group that wanted to provide restaurants, and they wound up with several, was a local family brewery called the Gerst Brewery. But Nashville was a dry place at the time, meaning no alcohol. And so the state legislature said, you guys can become your own city and vote to be a city within a city and vote to be wet or dry. Because they wanted the restaurants from Gerst, and Gerst wanted to sell their beer, they incorporated as a city, the fairgrounds, and decided to be wet. These are some of the, these are photographs of some of the ribbons that give you an idea of what dedicated days there were, this Presbyterian Day and the 7th Annual Reunion of United Confederate Veterans. One of the most enjoyable things, I think, about the fair, and what I would like to have a time machine and go visit, was the Midway, because there were rides and things like Streets of Cairo where you could ride the camels. This one was called Shoot the Chute, and people would go up in this little cog thing. Kind
of like the log ride. Yeah.
Very much. We think we're so advanced. They had it down, but it was straight, just whoosh down with this big splash. Evidently, people really got carried away with this, and when they drained the pool, they found several sets of false teeth.
Hey, this ride's so good it'll knock your teeth out, right?
The souvenirs that were available are interesting too. They had, sterling silver spoons and this beautiful stuff that is called ruby flash glass. Okay. So they'd have a plain crystal blank dipped in the red liquid glass, and then whoever was selling them could engrave Mother or Daisy or Lula. One of the fun places at the Midway was the Streets of Cairo, and the big attraction there were the camel rides. They had 3 camels whose names were Yankee Doodle, Alibaba, and Nancy Hanks.
Had the Cuban village here?
Yes.
So there were representations of all over the world.
Right, Chinese village. Village. And of course, we look at these with our 21st century eyes, and they look chauvinistic, to put it mildly. But again, it might be the only exposure somebody in rural Tennessee or Alabama or Georgia might ever have to anything Chinese or South American or Egyptian. And even though they're kind of on the carny side of things, it was at least a way to say,
Absolutely.
Here are people who are people, even though they grew up
That's right.
different. 1920 was the year when they finally decided to make the building permanent.
Yeah.
They wanted to make it accurate. The goal in all of this was historic accuracy, as near as they could do it. So they purchased from England a set of casts of the fragments from the ancient Parthenon, which are in the British Museum. And the sculptors who worked on our building used those casts as the basis for what they made on the outside. So they would take a plaster cast of a fragment and complete that figure with clay. So here we see that fragment used with arms and legs and the rest of the body.
Completed, absolutely.
And then they made a mold of that, and that's what they cast the figure outside with. So a great deal of attention paid to
Absolutely.
accuracy.
Absolutely.
When the Parthenon was being made permanent, a man who had grown up in this area but had made his money in insurance in Illinois felt a need to do something about roots and family, and the Centennial had reintroduced him to all of that. He had spent his discretionary income buying art, and so when he found out that the Parthenon was being made permanent, he went through his dealer in New York and said, if Nashville will agree to build a fireproof gallery for it and respect my anonymity until I'm dead, I'll give them my art. And the city said, well, yeah, I think we can do that. Yeah. So he sent 3 shipments of 21 paintings each in 1927, one in 1927 and 2 in 1929. And then he died in 1930. We don't know if he would have continued to give or not, but the core of our permanent collection is what Mr. Cowan gave. And so I want to show you 2 or 3 of my favorites.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. One is the next oldest piece. It's by Frederick Church, and it's called The Wreck. He painted it in 1852, and it's possible that he had in mind the ship of state headed toward the wreck that became the Civil War. If so, he certainly sees the possibility of hope at the end with the light. Yeah, the storm is over, people have survived. This one is called The New Dress. It's by a painter named Edwin Blashfield, and many people really love this because the artist's skill is so visible here.
Gotcha.
I mean, there's satin and lace and velvet and silk and carpet, flocked wallpaper, some enormous mantle with imported pottery. And we think it was probably somebody who made a lot of money and wanted to show off everything, including his trophy wife or debutante daughter.
There you go.
And this next one is a painting by Winslow Homer, who's probably the best known painter in the collection to regular folks in this country. It's called Rab and the Girls. The dog is Rab, and we're pretty sure that Rab was painted later, that he exhibited the painting with just the 2 women, and someone maybe wanted to buy it but had a dog and said, I want my dog in the painting.
There you go.
So, and there was a very sentimental, very popular book at this time about a dog, a mastiff, who went to his master's gravesite and just couldn't, stayed at the gravesite, very loyal. So we think that's probably why it's called Rab and why the dog is in there.
This is quite an impressive room, Leslie.
It is. This is as near as scholarship can get it, what we think the ancient Parthenon looked like on the inside. The focal point was this enormous statue of the goddess Athena. In antiquity, she was plated in gold, and on something this large, that would have probably been about 2,000 pounds of gold. This is real gold, but it's just about 8 or 8.5 pounds.
Right, because it's gold leaf.
Right. The statue was the focal point of the building, as I said, but it was because the city of Athens regarded her as their particular patron deity. They worshipped all the gods and goddesses, but Athena looked after the city and ensured its prosperity. Since she was the goddess of prudent warfare as well as wisdom, she made sure they were successful in battle. And so the buildings that we know as the beautiful ruins on the Acropolis were built shortly after the Persian Wars, which the Greek city-states independently and then together had been fighting for some time. And so this was a way of saying, thank you to the goddess. And also a lot of saying, look how pious we are, look how rich we are, look how artistic we are. There was a whole lot of show-off about this. We do that too.
Yeah, we do the same thing.
Sure.
Look at our monuments. There
Exactly.
You go. Same kind of thing.
All the imagery on her is specifically relates to how they felt about themselves and their relationship to Athena, or about battles where the forces of monsters or chaos against the forces of civilization and reason. And so there's imagery on her sandals, there's imagery on the outside of the shield and painted on the inside of the shield, and every one of those is something from their mythology that says the forces of reason and civilization win. And they were saying by implication, we are the civilized people versus the Persians, whom we've finally defeated. I think scholars and Persians would certainly disagree that they were barbarians, but that's how the Greeks wanted to think about themselves.
Right.
It's interesting to know that the statue is from the floor to the top of the center crest, 42 feet tall, and the statue of Nike in her hand is 6'4".
When you stand here, it's quite impressive.
Yes.
Definitely get a perspective on that. And then, like you say, you notice all the embellishment. You have the snake, the shield, and the spear. Obviously, she's goddess of war, so
is.
pretty important to have your weapons with you.
It is important, and it's important to note that the weapons are at rest now. So she's finished the battle. She's brought victory, and everybody's...
But she's ready to go at any time.
She is, always prepared. She probably was a Girl Scout, don't you think?
Probably, yeah, or a brownie, one or the other.
Yeah.
Wow, this is an impressive room.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, this must have what it looked like as close as you could get it to ancient times, right?
Yes, and this was the treasury in antiquity, so people didn't come in here unless they were bringing or taking, I guess, treasure.
Right.
One thing that is interesting is that the building is available after museum hours for a corporate dinner or a wedding reception, or a wedding and reception.
Whoa.
So people can...
Wow, this is kind of impressive for a wedding.
Right. You might not want to compete with Athena, but if you're having the reception, why not?
I think it'd be pretty fun. Pretty fun
bless
thing.
it.
Exactly. And then over here we have these amazing doors we were talking about.
I want you to see these.
Let's check these out. Wow, these doors are impressive.
They are. They are 24 feet tall and 6.5 feet wide and a foot thick each door. And there are 4 of them, 2 on this end and 2 identical ones on the other end.
Solid.
Brass.
Solid.
Bronze.
Bronze, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're pretty heavy too. So now how are these constructed?
They were made by the Long Island Bronze Company in the 20s, and that company no longer exists, unfortunately, and there's not much in the way of records that have survived either. But they are a modern day interpretation of what we think the ancient doors looked like. Probably, as I said, those were wood.
Wood with.
But I think it was, in our day, easier to do the bronze than the wood. And these, if you will pull as though you're going to close it, then I'll tell you how much they weigh.
Hey, one hand. Look at this. Gosh, I could feel this thing. I could swing this sucker.
Well, that's a 7.5-ton door.
But they actually, they're put together well, because, I could pull this with one hand, so that means it's really well balanced.
It is beautifully balanced.
So
There's a ball-bearing collar at the top and the bottom, and that makes them very smooth moving.
And then what's the weight of them?
7.5 tons each door.
7.5 tons each? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I love it. Thanks for showing this. This is amazing.
We hope that you'll come back.
Definitely.
There's even more to see than we've had time to cover.
Well, if people are lucky enough to get out here, they can take a tour, and there's an admission, obviously.
Yes.
And what's the story on the admission?
It's $6 for adults.
Wow, that's amazing for what you get.
$4 for children and seniors. Under 4 children are free.
Okay, and they get to learn a little bit about history, take a tour, and also experience the park.
Right, it's in a beautiful park.
It is a beautiful park. Well, thank you so much for having us. It's been wonderful.
I'm glad you came.
And thank you so much for being with us. And until next time, just remember to enjoy.